Stop her now!
You will not touch her!
Please, everyone, calm yourselves.
Leave her be.
The central lantern had gone out, and a child's small shoe lay on the wet cobbles, and suspicion snapped across the night like a raised voice. The night watchman dropped his pole and crouched to lift the shoe by the heel, the leather cold and damp. He called aloud, "Who walks here?" And his voice swallowed the cobbles. Within 5 breaths a woman answered from a doorway. "It's my child's. I thought I tied it at his bed." That exchange marked the problem plain. Someone had moved through sleeping houses while the village's protections failed. Suspicion guided the night watchman's steps as he followed the smear of prints away from the lantern's base. He kept his shoulders square, his lamp tilted low so the flame would not show across the fog. The historian's quiet record later named him by trade John the Watch. But in the moment he was a man with a duty and a tightening chest. He tested the air with his nostrils, wood smoke, damp straw, and something oily and wrong near the well. The first emotion he felt was suspicion. It made him check doors, peer under eaves, and watch faces more than bodies. That suspicion would shape every choice he made that night. Night in the village was a sequence of small certainties. A lanthorn hung on the green, someone kept the brazier fed by the alehouse, and households performed bedside gestures so children slept without wandering or waking. Those rituals were older than the watchman. John had been taught them as a boy. He moved from house to house by habit, tap the post, clear a throat, knock and listen. The village depended on those small acts as if they were mortar in a wall. When one act failed, neighbors felt exposed. A knot of people stood under the eaves outside the alehouse when John returned with the shoe. The elder Thomas had already put his wool cloak over his shoulders and was holding his staff with a hand that did not tremble. Thomas stepped forward and said, "John, the lantern should never die." Who saw it? His voice was flat. The elder did not raise it unless the matter required force. Miller's wife, Marta, crossed her arms and pressed her palms to her forearms as if warming them. "I woke to a draught," she said. My girl Mabel stirred. I sang the lullaby, closed the shutters. I thought it enough her eyes were on John, and then on the dark, where the lane opened to the green. The young mother, Edith, lifted Mabel from within the inn's doorway so the child could see. Edith's hands shook. "The shoe isn't hers. I checked twice." Her voice had a sharp edge that came from not sleeping. They argued at once about what had failed. The lantern, the watch, the bedtime gestures. "Thomas, rituals keep more than comfort. They keep us ready. If one goes, we all go loose," Marta answered in a quick set of lines. "Thomas, Don T put it on the dead." Tonight the brazier went thin twice. Their exchange was 3 quick sentences that collided and revealed the stakes. A hole in routines could mean a man left his bed, or a stranger moved easily through the dark. The village decided to change the watch. Thomas barked the order. The lantern bearer, Elias, who usually walked the farther lanes, stepped forward and said, "I'll take another round." Elias's knuckles whitened around the strap of his small brazier. The watchman looked to him and said, "Keep near the well." My rounds missed the back lanes tonight. They arranged shifts at the green beneath Thomas' house, and every hand had a role. Feed the brazier, check hinges, close lattice shutters, listen for crying or doors. Elias walked with his brazier held close, flames licking the edge of the metal, heat on his palms through the strap. He moved slow so the glow did not flare bright in the mist. As he crossed the lane toward the mill, Marta came out to meet him. "Elias," she said, "check the mill house. My husband sleeps with one boot by the bed and his other by the door. If someone goes, he'll be the one to wake them." Elias grunted and turned his brazier deeper into the dark. In that exchange, suspicion shifted toward a practical worry. The vulnerability of the first sleep hour, when some beds emptied and some people rose. Elias Round found the mill cottage door ajar. He pushed it wider with the butt of his brazier and saw the straw mattress pressed down where a man had slept. The wife's face filled the doorway. "Where's Thomas?" she said. Her voice narrowed like a knife. "His boot is by the bed and the other is gone." Elias moved into the room and checked the hearth. Cold. No ash cup. He followed a single fresh boot print into the lane, each print pressed deep in the mud. Without talking, Elias called out, "John!" Footprints to the well. The discovery moved the watch into pursuit. John and Elias traded short commands while they ran. Left by the cart, "Call the elder." Their sentences were clipped. Action. Led. The kind of dialogue that left no room for long thought. They came on a pale silhouette in the alley, a figure moving with the quiet purpose of someone who had practiced this crossing. Elias ran and nearly caught the cloak. The figure slipped on wet stones and left a torn edge in the fabric that stayed behind. When the lantern bearer returned with the torn fringe, his face had a new expression. He looked shaken. He held the torn cloth like proof. He moved between houses as if each had been left open for him. Elias and his hands would not stop trembling. The villagers pressed for immediate answers. Thomas stepped forward and demanded, "Who would do this? Who knows our bedside words?" The question landed like a thrown stone in water. It made ripples of suspicion run through each person gathered. By very late night a traveling peddler had anchored his wagon at the green. He had the common accoutrements: ropes, leather pouches, a small bell. Villagers dragged him out with short, certain movements. He answered questions with a measured tone, but when they accused him of tampering with rituals he laughed in a small, dry way. "I sell tin and thread and medicines," he said. "I know lullabies. Men hum them for coin," he each line in short clauses. The peddler's voice contained names and melodies that matched the village rhyme scheme. That detail changed suspicion into curiosity and a different kind of dread. "Thomas, name the verses mothers sing here." The peddler named them without hesitation. "The one you sing for the first sleep. The cross at the head. The 2 knocks for the outer latch." He listed one by one. His knowledge was precise and he used the village names. Marta spat a single word. "Trader." John watched the peddler's hands. They were rough and steady. The peddler leaned forward and said, "A child left his shoe by the green once, some years. They me how to call him home. I listened and I kept the lines. Knowledge is my trade." That answer twisted the mood. He claimed a neutral reason for knowing household customs, but his proximity to secrets made people bristle. They followed a thin smoke thread toward the green and found half a dozen villagers sitting awake around a dying brazier. Their coats hung limp. Their mouths moved in a low murmur. A silent figure tended to them with slow movements. When the villagers stepped forward, the scene became frantic. Thomas shouted, "Stand up! Who sits by that brazier?" The silent man turned and the watch saw a man they did not recognize. He had no pack. He had taken seats in other yards during the first sleep and spoken no word. He moved through the small group with a careful calm and lit the brazier again. The village pressed him. The confrontation broke into close, quick lines. "Who are you?" "Elias, why did you sit by our doors?" The stranger looked at each face and held their gaze for a single breath before answering. "I warmed the lost and stayed their hands so they slept again," he said. "I put soft phrases by beds and watched that no one rose. I eased them back to rest." His explanation sounded like salvation and like theft at once. Some men reached for him. Thomas ordered, "Bind him until morning." Others, some of the women, hesitated, staring at the way the stranger had seemed to hold a limp child's hand in each house and then leave. The peddler looked at the stranger and laughed, a short sound with no warmth. "You leave your children to me, and you blame me for what I know," he said. Then he named a lullaby line that the stranger had used at the mill. The name matched the verse Marta hummed when her husband slept. That match revealed a new angle. Knowledge of lullabies had been a route for movement. The peddler's claim drove suspicion into a sharper, angrier shape. Voices rose. Arguments snapped back and forth in tight bursts.
You can just sit by doors!
We let him because he calmed them? Who gave him the right? The right came from need? They argued 3 times in quick exchange until one of the villagers, a thin man named Peter, shouted. He sat at our yard and I woke with my child's hand in hers, and there was no harm until dawn. His sentence compelled attention because it described a concrete moment of contact. The silence after Peter's remark lasted 2 breaths. Then Thomas, we choose our watchers and we choose bedside rights. Tonight we will change both, he pointed and laid out new rules in short directives. Double the shift hours, pair up houses across lanes, and leave a spare boot at the bedside so a missing shoe would not mean a person left. The villagers moved to act. They bound the peddler's hands with rope, and Elias checked the stranger's cloak again. The elders' orders made practical changes. They were not speeches of fate. Each instruction altered how people would sleep next. In the quiet, after the binding, some details revealed themselves. The torn cloak matched the ragged edge the lantern Bira had torn in the alley. The peddler argued that his knowledge only came from trade, and from songs traded for coin. He named mattresses he'd seen in distant towns. I learned lullabies for a skimming coin. I never thought to use them to move again a man's feet. His voice had the casual tone of a man who wanted to be believed. The midnight reveal arrived when Marta produced a scrap of paper found in a cottage. A short list in a child's hand of bedside gestures with small crosses drawn beside names. It read, "Knock twice, say child's name, leave a shoe." The paper had been tucked under a pillow without anyone noticing. Thomas read it aloud, and the line altered what they thought they knew. Who taught the child to write that? He asked. The question made the peddler bite his lip. He turned pale under his beard. I sold ink to the innkeeper yesterday, he admitted. The discovery shifted suspicion from a stranger's malice toward the way village customs had been recorded and circulated. The confusion split the group. Some wanted to flog the peddler where he sat. Some wanted to question him until dawn. Elias leaned over and said, "We can tie him, but he will not reveal who walks at night." Thomas considered that and then ordered, "We will station pairs by lanes and leave one man at the well until noon." The decisions were tangible. They moved bodies, lights, and rules across the green. People took the new orders and carried them out with hurry in their steps. Before dawn, the watch confronted the stranger a final time in a ring around the brazier. He had no answers that settled the village. The peddler sat with his hands bound and used his eyes to watch the movement of feet. Then, without calling out, the stranger rose and walked into the mist. No single man overtook him. He left with the casual gait of someone returning to a practiced route. For a moment no one moved. Marta saw soft and wiped the side of her face. Thomas called. After him, they ran, but the alleys swallowed footsteps and the village found him gone. Dawn thinned the fog. The morning showed the shoe lying by the lantern and a cluster of altered routines. A spare boot on the miller's bed, an extra brazier fuel set by the Alla house, and pairs of neighbors arranged to check each other's doors. John walked the empty lane at a steady pace, and every motion he made was shaped by suspicion, turned into careful resolve. The villagers had changed the watch, and they had changed bedtime rules, because choices had to be concrete. They would not trust a single lantern again. Edith folded Mabel's shawl and pressed it to the child's shoulder. We will not let him out of our sight again tonight." Her sentence contained a plan rather than a feeling. Marta nodded and lifted a lantern. Thomas checked the rope on the peddler's wrists to be sure it would hold. Elias, whose hand had trembled earlier, straightened his shoulders. They had moved from suspicion to action to a caution that would last. The historian recorded the night's details later with the calm that belonged to his trade. He noted the torn cloak, the child's scrap of paper, the named lullaby, and the way a stranger's presence could be both balm and threat. He described how villagers modified routines, doubling watch shifts, leaving boots by beds, and teaching children not to leave shoes at the door. He also recorded the small unsettled thing that remained, the shoe on the cobbles. The article of clothing was a concrete remnant that no rule could erase. The final movement of the chapter was a set of directed choices. Thomas ordered that 2 men sit at the well each night, and that each household recite a fixed bedside word sequence before first sleep. Martha and Edith taught their neighbors one of the lullaby lines the peddler had recited, adding a small change they hoped only they would know. Elias volunteered to walk the farther lanes at first sleep, and John he would take the later watch by the brazier. Their decisions were not grand promises. They were specific acts. They bound the peddler's wagon wheel to a stake as a temporary measure and sent a boy to fetch the constable in the next market town. The boy ran on a straight legal errand, and his legs thumped the lane like a metronome. The alert service of the boy's feet was another small ritual added to the night's list. As the mist finally lifted, the shoe remained where John had first found it. Nobody picked it up for a full hour. Touching it felt like closing a small wound, and the village was not ready for that. When Martha finally stooped to lift it, she set it on the elder's step and said, "Keep it until dusk. Let everyone see what was left behind." Thomas placed his staff across the shoe and tapped it twice, the action both a seal and an order. The historian concluded the night's entry with a practical note. The village did not return to its first pattern. They adjusted. Bedtime actions became doubled and paired. The peddler left the market town the next day under guard. People later recalled seeing him at the edge of a lane, hunched over his wheel, and they could not decide if he had meant harm or had simply misused the knowledge of lullabies. The night had shown how ordinary customs, names whispered at a bedside, a brazier set and fed, the placement of shoes, could become tools when someone moved between houses. John walked home with the shoe tucked into his coat. He did not sleep immediately. He laid the shoe on his table and straightened the brass watch he had worn in his breast pocket. He wound it and set it on the small shelf by the lamp. He checked his boots and left both of them by the door. His actions were the night's last recorded decisions. He would watch differently, and he would keep the shoe as an object that would remind him exactly what had happened and what had to change. The shoe on his table was a concrete, resolute thing that closed the chapter with a specific motion. He lifted the lamp and walked out to check the brazier one last time. A lantern on the green crashed to the cobbles as its rope split, scattering glass and ember. Someone shouted, "The light's down!" The soft, spoken historian moved forward with the crowd and felt suspicion tighten his hands more than the chill did. He had come the night before to record the village swatch ritual and had noted the central lantern's steady burn. Now fragments of glass lay near a child's small shoe, and the shoe's sole had a strip of wet clay from the lane. The historian's suspicion pushed him toward the broken post before questions could arrive. Neighbors shoved and stepped around the glass. "Who did this?" Marjorie the baker demanded. Her voice cut short when the watchman lifted a length of frayed rope. The historian kept close to the watchman, watching the rope and watching faces. Within 5 minutes the constable began a house-to-house route. The historian stayed with him, clipboard unused but eyes sharp. He listened as Marjorie opened her door and pointed to an empty peg above the hearth. "My ward is gone," she said, and her fingers hovered where a small iron ring had hung for years. Suspicion spread faster than the cold. The historian noted the movement of glances, the way Thomas the watch captain checked his pair of brass, tipped poles twice before answering. "Someone's cutting our ropes and taking charms. We must find who wants us without light or warding." The line of his voice was steady, but his jaw tightened as he spoke. That tightening showed suspicion not as a name but as motion. Tightened hands, shorter breaths, paced steps. By the time the council gathered beneath the church porch, The historian had a list of missing items and 3 accounts of ropes that had been intentionally snipped. The elder Agnes ran both palms over her wool apron and said, "If our protections fail, the old knights come back," the watch captain replied. "We reinforce the lines and set patrols. No talk of rights here, Agnes. We need work that holds rope and eye." The exchange hardened the evening into a decision to act. The historian watched arguments supply the meeting with heat. His suspicion shifted into a careful hunger for proof. He stepped between a man who wanted cleansing and the captain who wanted patrols, and he asked, "Where did you last see the central rope tied, Thomas?" Thomas pointed toward the green by the elm. It broke above the brazier. "Someone cut it where the splice goes." The historian recorded the location in his memory instead of ink. The choice to record by sight came from suspicion and a desire to name the cause. They sent a small patrol that night. Thomas chose his young hand, Peter, for the lane near the old mill. The historian followed at the patrol's edge, telling himself he was there only to observe fact, not to join force. Peter's breath came in shallow, measured pulls. He moved with hands hovering over pockets where a young watchman kept a small knife and a length of spare cord. Peter stopped beside a damp footprint and knelt. "They went this way," he said, "wet clay on the heel. And see, snip marks on this bit of cord." He held a piece of rope up under the lamplight. The historian leaned in and felt the sudden shift. Suspicion curdled into alarm when the snips matched others reported that evening. Alarm made Peter's fingers tremble, and Peter's voice rose a notch. "Someone's been cutting for weeks, not just tonight." At the mill edge they found a traveling peddler hunched over a sack. Jonas the peddler looked up when Thomas shouted, and his hands froze above carved tokens. "I trade small things, Jonas." He tried to keep his voice steady. "Charms, trinkets. I sell what pays." The patrol moved in a slow circle. The historian watched Thomas, eyes narrow. He heard Peter ask, "Where did you get these carvings?" "They match the ones people say are missing." Jonas lifted his chin. "Bought from places I pass. From folk who pay me to make charms look used." Jonas' explanation shifted the room. The historian felt the emotion change in the crowd. Alarm became distrust. People stepped back from the peddler who paid you, Jonas. Agnes, her tone low and tight. Jonas licked his lips and named a small list of trades and lanes. Then he hesitated and said, "One man paid me more than others. A woodcutter's apprentice, Edwin, near the hollow." The historian caught how the name landed. A new current of suspicion turned inward to a familiar face. The historian followed the patrol to the apprentice's cottage. They pushed open a door that smelled of unlit peat and damp cloth. The apprentice Edwin was not there. His bed had been used. A half-packed bag lay beside the cot. At the doorway a singed rope stub hung like a clipped promise. The historian's suspicion shifted again, now doubt about whether the apprentice had been taken or had left of his own will. Marjorie stood at the cot, running her hand over the half-packed bag. "He loved the town." "Edwin did," she said. "He learned his father's trade. He helped at the oven. He wouldn't leave without bread." Her fingers trembled against the coarse wool of the bag. The historian noticed the movement and logged it. He watched Thomas study a small set of footprints leading toward the hollow under the lane. Thomas gathered his men. "We follow quietly. We do not burn his home tonight. We take him back alive if we can." His voice left no room for ceremony. The historian watched Thomas give orders with short phrases and repeated names. He noted how Thomas' cadence changed when he said Edwin's name. The watch captain's voice held disappointment along with duty. They slipped through the hollow. Fog hugged the low ground and made the lane thief easy. Peter's hand brushed against a hedgerow, and he swallowed. The historian kept close enough to see small motions. The apprentice hurried footing, the slight singe on the end of a rope, the way Edwin's mind might have worked to justify action. The patrol found Edwin kneeling by the central post, knife in hand, cutting the rope above the elm. Edwin did not look like a villain the moment they found him. He had ash on his hands and a smear of soot along his cheekbone. His breathing came quick. He held the knife downward and spoke with a low voice. They bind us with charms and rites that strip us of choice. Edwin, I cut to feel free. I cut to show the watch we are not the superstitions that hold us. Thomas moved forward and grabbed Edwin's wrist. The historian watched hands become arguments. Edwin, Thomas, you cut what's kept us from the dark. You put children in danger. Why name your own village for loss? The apprentice did not look away. Thomas, they sell safety to the fearful and take coin that might feed a family. I took what I could to break that market. The historian felt the emotion in both men shift. Anger in Thomas, stubborn conviction in Edwin. The patrol closed ranks like a net. A brief scuffle followed. Peter lunged to pin Edwin's other arm. Edwin twisted, shoved Peter, and the knife flashed. Someone shouted, "Down!" Thomas brought his weight onto Edwin. The historian heard bones crack in a wrist when Thomas forced the knife from his hand. The clash resolved when the apprentice's breath left him in small pants, and he went limp under several firm hands. The historian's suspicion had become a harsh certainty. This was not mere prank but deliberate action that split the village's trust. They stood in the hollow with Edwin bound and breathing fast. Thomas spoke, keeping his voice low. Agnes will decide the right. I will see justice done in the light. Agnes arrived with 2 older women and a bowl of ash. She moved straight to Edwin and looked him over as if reading a record. We will cleanse and name his transgression, she said. We will show the night that our laws hold. Her hands did a practiced motion over Edwin's head, rubbing a smear of ash that did not hide the blood at his knuckles. Jonas came forward and met the historian's eyes. They paid me, he said again, not because they hated them. Because they wanted to test which charms were false. They wanted to know if a charm would stand up, if someone tried to take it. Jonas' voice was flat. Thomas barked. Who paid you that named Edwin? Jonas stared a long moment and then said, He me to make charms seem used. Edwin's name came because the apprentice bought a dozen tokens, and then could not be found at his hearth that night. The historian heard the shift where villagers began to place blame outward and inward at once. The group's mood moved from anger to a prickling, unsettled shame. At the green, the elder asked for a public binding. Thomas wanted punishment. They argued quickly and in short lines that cut the space. Agnes, a cleansing will not stop black markets. Thomas, we need to close roads and search packs. And you would put shame on a family forever. Agnes answered sharply, shame keeps us careful. Fear keeps us safe. They traded 3 more quick lines. The watch must do its work, Thomas insisted. The watch will do it public and true. Agnes fired back. If we do not show the village the cost, they will trade away their gods for coin. The historian felt the argument's heat. 2 kinds of protection, practical and ritual, fighting for priority. The villagers murmured. Edwin's mother, Hannah, stepped forward and twisted her scarf. You cannot take my son for display in the square. He is my child. He is not dead. Do not hang him to teach the rest. Her voice broke. The historian watched choices press into bodies. Thomas's jaw worked. He made the decision not by speech, but by motion. He unclipped a length of spare cord from his belt and lifted it off. We bind him here for now, he said. Then Agnes will lead a cleansing. We will let the law decide after dawn. The historian recorded the move as an action that balanced discipline and mercy. Early that morning the family mended a hearth. Hannah knelt at the fire and tied a small iron ring to a peg above the hearth. She used slow, deliberate hands, and the historian watched each knot. There she said to her child Tommy, who hovered at her knee, we put it back. We will sleep with the fire and the ring both. Tommy repeated the gesture he had seen Hannah do. The act of rehanging became small, practical, and final. They let Edwin sit bound under the elm through the pale hours. The villagers moved lanterns back into place and avoided one another's eyes while they worked. Some replaced snapped ropes with thicker twine. Others checked their door latches twice. In the quiet that followed the struggle, the historian heard soft murmurs trading new plans and old fears. He watched Jonas gather his sack, hands lighter, and set off down the lane without the brazen confidence he had carried earlier. When dawn touched the roofs, Thomas walked up to the tied apprentice and unfastened the cord. He did not speak much. He handed Edwin to Hannah and gestured for the patrol to accept no pleasure from the night's work. "We hold our laws," Thomas once, then turned away to watch the village resume its chores. The historian heard no triumph in Thomas's steps. There was only a slow, measured return to duty. The chapter closed with a small, concrete scene on a kitchen floor. Hannah lifted the iron ring, rubbed the soot from its edge, and pushed the peg back into the wall. Her fingers trembled, but she set the ring so it would not hang crooked. Tommy pressed his forehead to the hearth's warm stone and said, "It is back, Mother." Hannah tightened the rope around the peg with a final, firm knot. Outside, a neighbor hung a replaced lantern above the green. The historian watched the small domestic rituals of mending and tying. The last image he carried into his notes was Hannah's hands, knotting the cord and pressing the ring snug against the wood. The historian left the village before noon to record what he had seen and heard. He had come to observe a culture of night, and left with a list of choices and consequences. A peddler's coin, an apprentice's defiance, a captain's duty, an elder's rights. The conflict had closed for now, and the village had chosen to bind then cleans. The historian's suspicion had moved through the night into verification, and then into a cautious, watchful calm. The final concrete action that settled the chapter was the small household motion, Hannah retying the charm above her hearth, and that knot held the village's uneasy decision until they met again. The night watchman hauled the damp bundle from the iron gate and found a child's wooden shoe tangled with a soot, blackened charm. Suspicion settled into his shoulders like a physical weight. He turned the shoe in his gloved hands. The charm had been rubbed by many palms. Its soot marked more than one doorstep. This was not a random loss. This was a mark. The village lanterns had already failed twice that week. The night watchman, known in speech as Thomas, kept his voice low but clipped. "Who leaves a child's shoe at the gate?" "Thomas." He called out the question and heard only the wet scrape of his boots on the cobbles. He moved without delay. Suspicion drove his steps toward the lane, where the central lantern had gone out days earlier and where a small shoe had been found on the wet cobbles weeks before. Thomas had changed since those earlier nights. He kept watch with steadier hands. He checked each post. He trusted routine. The shoe at the gate undermined that trust. The historian watched, and in his notes he wrote of suspicion as the root of the night's motion. The historian recorded what Thomas saw and what Thomas chose to do because of that suspicion. The record would later shape how the village remembered this night. Thomas lifted the shoe to the lamp keeper's shed. Rain hissed from eaves. His apprentice, Matthias, followed one step behind with a stub of a lantern held close to his chest. Thomas, Matthias, breath fogging. There was a scrap of cloth near the hedge. "Bring it, Thomas." He did not ask why. He had learned that questions could waste time. They pushed open the shed door. Oil smelled sharp inside. The lantern keeper, a wide, shouldered man named Aldred, stood beside racks of glass and leather. A woman with a shawl over her hair stepped forward. Her hands were reddened by cold. She held her child's sleeve to her chest. "Aldred," the woman said, "this belongs to my lot. I thought the shoe was lost for good." Aldred blinked. He handled the shoe like a ledger. The charm matches ash marks on 3 thresholds. Matthias, voice quick. "I saw them by the baker's door and by the smithy." Aldred laid the shoe on a splintered table. He ran a thumb along the charm. "These marks are not accidents. Aldred, someone has been through our thresholds after lights have failed." Outside, the green was nearly dark. The big torch that normally sat before the elders' bench guttered last week, and a lantern had crashed to the cobbles in the market. The historian reminded the reader of those past details with a measured sentence. The central lantern had gone out. A lantern had smashed on the green. Those events now connected. Doubt pushed at the villagers in the shed. The mother, named Maren, pressed her child's sleeve to the leather-bound notebook she had brought. Her jaw worked. Maren, Thomas, did Lot wander near the green tonight? No, Maren answered. She watched the bread bake and then fell asleep by the hearth. Aldred shook his head. He spoke then in a voice that had the roughness of long hours and the bluntness of trade. We cannot afford oil for careless fires. Aldred, I do what I must. I admit I let a light die once to spread oil over a harder week, but I did not lay ash at any doorway. The admission shifted the room. Suspicion bent toward negligence. Negligence turned closest to necessity. The first emotion shift arrived as doubt became a practical worry about scarcity. Aldred, the elder said, when they brought the matter to the bench later, you left a brazier empty at the east post last watch. Why? Aldred avoided the elder's eyes. He spoke with the economy of someone used to bargaining for fuel. I kept back oil for the winter rations, Aldred. I did it to keep more families from sitting without heat later on. You chose some houses over others. The elder demanded. I marked none of them, Aldred replied. I did not smear ash at thresholds. The night watcher's apprentice had found the missing brazier. That discovery fanned the tension quickly. The villagers gathered on the green in their coats and scarves. Several voices rose. Names met names. Thomas, the parish priest, Father Joss, stepped forward with palms together. Show us the shoe. Thomas laid the shoe on the green bench. Lantern light fractured across wet wood. The baby moon gave no answer. It matches 3 doorways. Matthias, pointing, I traced prints to the river hedge where candles had been burned. The crowd leaned in. The historian wrote the moment plainly. A shared discovery changed private unease into a communal worry. The next event pushed the story along. Footprints led to the boundary. The watchers followed the wet mud. Torches bobbed. The old boundary hedge stood low and patchy where children had played in summer. They found a cleared patch by the river, tramped grass, the wax of half-burned candles, and a ring of ash lay in a small hollow. The wax still had flecks of colored cloth melted in it, a token, perhaps, or a ribbon used in a child's hair. At that instant, a young village youth stepped from between 2 willows and froze when he saw the group. You there? Thomas called. Stop. The boy, called Jory, had mud on his sleeves, and that keening furtiveness young people carry at night. He took 1 step backward and then another. Fear showed in the way his hands trembled when he pulled his cap down. Jory. Matthias, voice higher than before. Why burn candles here? Jory's answer came halting. We do it for those who are lost. We make marks so the dead know where to find things. The historian noted the next shift. Suspicion curled into a softer confusion. A ritual glance revealed neither sabotage nor malice at first, but a private mourning that had used the night. A villager shouted, you set lights to be taken down. You mark doors to mock us. The exchange sparked the required confrontation. 3 rapid back, and 4th lines moved the argument. Village elder. Did you intend harm, Jory? Jory, no, elder. We meant only to remember. Village elder. Remembering does not break lamps. Jory flinched. He tried to answer, but the crowd's weight pressed him into silence. The historian kept the record even-handed. He described actions. He described faces. He wrote down the elder's palm hitting the bench as a punctuating sound. At the green the lantern, keeper faced accusation. Aldred spoke again, this time quieter, and with a nearer exhaustion. Iration oil, Aldred. I am not perfect. I sleep less so others warm. I do what I can. Aldred, the elder said, we will not have the village left to chance. We must choose. The watchman's roll sharpened. Thomas walked the circle of cottages and explained how he had followed prints from the gate to the hedge and back to a rank of cottages where wind left soot on shutters. Thomas. Someone moves after our lights die, he said. Someone uses our dark to do what we do not see. The historian recorded small physical reactions instead of naming feelings. Thomas's jaw clenched. He wiped mud from his palm on his coat. He spoke in short sentences. We will set a watch. Thomas, we put a man at every post. We will not ask who mourns at night any more. But before they could finalize their plan, the crowd stirred. A woman's sob broke the hush. The grieving mother, whose name was Elder, stepped forward from the outer ring. Elder, you do not know my daughter, she said. You have not stood in my kitchen at dusk. You do not know how she braided her hair. Elder, I set candles when the storm took her last spring. I marked no doorstep. I only asked that she be found by light. Her voice broke. Her hands trembled. She clutched the hem of her apron. The group watched her, and the night shifted again. The emotion shifted from suspicion and doubt into a raw pity that unsettled the accusations. Then a sudden action broke the gathering's rhythm. Someone snuffed the chief torch. The torch went out as a single hand pushed a metal shroud down. For a beat there was dark so complete the coughs of the crowd sounded like measured shots. A figure stepped from that dark. Elder moved forward with a small clay bowl in both hands. She set the bowl in the center of the green, crushed her fingers around a sprig of hair, and whispered a prayer that the historian wrote down as she muttered the child's name. The action was concrete. The bowl held ash in a candle stub village crowd. Why now? No one answered. The green held the silence of a group that had seen a private ritual in public and could not decide whether to stop it. Thomas reached for his torch and hesitated. The watchers had to decide whether to expose the act with light or to keep the small secrecy Elder had made. His hesitation lasted a handful of beats. He could lift the lamp and show clearly who moved to the hedge. He could call for arrests. He could also respect the bowl and its small ceremony. Action and choice collided. Thomas lowered his hand. Thomas. Leave her be, he said finally, voice steady. Let us not break this for a woman who already breaks at home. The elder closed his eyes briefly and then nodded. The choice did not end the argument. Voices rose again. The village divided between those who wanted strict enforcement and those who wanted a measured allowance for private rights. The confrontation under the snuffed torch was the chapter's peak. It contained the required rapid exchange of 3 to 6 lines, and it forced a decision that would change how the village treated night. Moving rituals, Aldred. I will not be judged for trying to keep bread on tables. Village elder, you must explain yourself to the watch. Thomas, we set watches tonight. We will share oil when needed. Elder, no more public shaming. Matthias, the brazier by the east post was taken, not broken. The historian described the crowd's micro-reactions. Hands went to mouths, eyes flicked from face to face. Someone spat on the cobbles. The physical reactions carried the emotional shifts without abstract phrasing. A small twist appeared that night. Matthias produced a scrap of rope found near the hedge with a knot that matched the rope on one of Aldred's spare lanterns. The knot suggested not only loss but reuse. It changed how the watchers understood the earlier outage at the green. Matthias. This knot is the same as on your spare lantern, Aldred. Aldred studied the rope and then laughed without humor. I tie knots that way when my hands are tired, he said. But I would not take my own spare and leave a house in dark. The twist pushed the story into a new angle. The pattern of outages might not be malicious sabotage, but a makeshift economy of oil and rope where people borrowed in secret. In the hush after the torch was snuffed, the historian recorded how the village's mood layered. Suspicion had led to doubt. Doubt had opened a possibility of pity. Pity had to stand against a need for order. Order had to give ground to private grief. They argued until the air grew colder. The elder proposed a practical bargain. Shared watches and a small pool of oil to be managed by the parish. It promised both light and a quiet allowance for candles burned in private. Village elder. We will set a rota. Each family gives 1 hour a month and 1 measure of oil when they can. We will not search bowls. We will not break rights. The bargain required a concession from Aldred and from the village watchers. Aldred put his palm on the bench and said, "I will hand over my spare stock to the parish. I will tend the racks properly." Elder nodded once and then turned to the small bowl she had set by the ash. She lifted the bowl slowly and handed it to Father Joss, elder. "Keep it safe," she said. The historian observed that the final emotion in the chapter leaned toward wary acceptance. The community reconfigured practice rather than issuing punishments. They preserved both light and a small space for private mourning. Dawn arrived uneven. Lanterns were relit. The wet green showed scattered footprints and the circle of watchers already tired from a night of questions. The elder struck his palm on the bench as a conclusion and named the new rota village elder. "Matthew, you take the first watch. Thomas, you supervise. Aldred, bring what oil you have. Father Joss will keep records." They agreed with short sentences. Plans were made in those brief lines. The historian closed his notes on the night by writing that the village chose continuity over rupture. The chapter ended not with a broad moral but with a concrete change. At first light, a small lantern was placed on the elder's bench. Thomas pocketed the suit, blackened charm, and laid the child's shoe on the bench beside it. He folded his gloves and handed them to Matthias. "Thomas, keep watch tonight," he said. Matthias took the gloves. He felt their rough leather, then looked up and nodded. His hands steadied as he took the brazier pail. The elder cracked his knuckles and read the rota aloud. The final beat was simple and tangible. The bell for the morning prayer rang, and the elder tapped the bench with his staff to mark the start of a new shared watch that would begin at dusk. The community moved from suspicion toward a practical truce. They had not solved every private sorrow, but they had decided how to live with it. The historian closed the account by listing what had changed. Schedules set, a small oil pool established, a quiet allowance made for private rituals. He did not add commentary. The last line recorded the day's first concrete sound, the bell, and the elder's hand striking the bench to confirm the rota. The bell repeated twice, and the chapter ended on that confirmed action. Widow Marga sat up and reached for the cradle only to find the charm looped at its foot had been cut away, and one small wooden shoe gone from the bedding. Suspicion tightened her hands around the blanket. She held the empty cradle rim and called for light. "Thomas!" She shouted down the hall, "The charm is gone. The shoe is gone. Who was at my door?" She moved without waiting. Her feet found the stone cool. She passed the hearth and tugged a corner of the remaining blanket into her shawl. The lamp by the doorway still burned low from earlier tending. She took it and stepped outside, the flame trembling as the wind found the lane. In the first minutes she found damp soot, darkened prints on the threshold, and a faint drag of wool toward the gate. Marga's suspicion guided every motion. Her hands searched the floor for cuts in the mat where a blade might have been used. Her fingers brushed a thin thread of black soot. She followed it, keeping the lamp low, stepping over tins and a fallen broom. The bruise of night felt practical to her. A child must be kept warm. A charm kept close. Without the charm, she believed, danger was nearer. That belief pulled her out into the lane. She met Thomas, the lantern keeper, before the green. He held a lamp with a rope still damp at the knot. He was wiping glass when she came up to him. "Thomas, Marga, my child's shoe is gone. The charm is cut." "I found soot by the cradle." She set the lamp down with a thumb to steady the flame. Thomas looked at the knot and then to the green. "The lamp split last hour," he said. "The rope gave. I tied it again. I found a brazier smothered near the gate. Someone tamped it out." He tapped the lamp where a hairline split ran across the wooden spindle. "Someone came through here with a brazier. Someone that knew to put it out." He did not finish the sentence. They walked together, lamp flame guttering against a soft wind. The night watchman met them on the lane and asked for what had happened. They him in short lines. The night watchman's hands went to his pole. He crouched to study prints by a gate child's shoe. He asked, Marga held up the empty heel in the lamplight and set it on his palm. The night watchman frowned. The shoe the field hand found 2 nights back, he said, the one by the central lantern. It was soaked then. Someone dropped it and left. Marga shivered though her shawl was wrapped. A memory threaded back to the lantern going out on the green and glass spilling over cobbles. Her voice tightened. It is the same pattern. They moved through the lane and found the brazier still damp at the green. Thomas pointed to 3 neighboring doors where tokens were missing from hooks. Elsbeth, she took some charms last moon to keep them dry. Thomas. But she told me she hung them back. The villagers came to the green in small groups. The lantern above them spat a weak glow. The elder arrived with a stick and a thin cough. He listened while Marga described the cut charm and the missing shoe. The elder's face went hard, then pinched with worry. We will double the watch, he said. We will keep the brazier lit and the lamps full. Jacob, a younger villager, stood at the edge of the crowd with his hood turned up against the wind. He shifted from foot to foot as people discussed doubling watches and renewing older rites. Jacob, the elder said, why are you standing there? Come forward and tell us if you saw anyone. Jacob's mouth closed. He nothing. A small council formed under the guttering lamp. Voices hit and passed like tools. They debated practical steps and older rites. Double the watch. Thomas proposed, make 2 rounds each shift. The elder said, no. We should renew the charms and have Elsbeth bless them at dawn. The night watchman said, we must search the churchyard. I found a thread there once that led me to a stranger. Debate moved fast, 3 to 6 lines at a time. Each voice named a person. Each voice said what it could and what it feared. Marga kept the lamp close and watched faces. Suspicion nudged her again when someone mentioned Elsbeth's name. Elsbeth, she said, stepping toward the midwife's doorway, have you moved charms for safekeeping? The midwife's hands were busy with a bundle as she opened her door. She held the bundle up like evidence. I moved 3 charms to my chest last week. Elsbeth answered, I feared damp and mice. I told Thomas, I hung them back before dusk yesterday. Her voice did not waver. She set the bundle on a stool and slid a hand across the top. Her fingers struck empty twine and a loose scrap. I do not have Marga's charm now. She looked at Marga and then at the crowd. I brought them to protect children. The midwife's tone was sharp with correction. Voices rose. You took them without telling some of us. Thomas, you would return them. I did return them. Elsbeth shot back. Ask anyone I visited. The elder held up a hand. We will not shout here. We will look and find the truth. Marga held her lamp steady though her hands trembled. She felt fear now layered under suspicion. She could imagine the cradle empty, the child cold. She could imagine a stranger using a blade. The thought made the fingers of her free hand clench. She stepped close to Elsbeth. Elsbeth, she said, did you touch the shoe I keep under the bed? Elsbeth frowned. No, she said. I only moved charms. The night watchman cut in. We will follow the prince to the churchyard, he said. If someone passed through there, the iron gate will tell us. Jacob looked at the iron gate as if it might answer. He stayed by the green's edge when the watchman and Thomas took lamps and went toward the church. They found a trail of wool fibers pinned to the iron. A rosary lay torn across the step, beads mixed with black soot. The night watchman crouched and picked up the rosary by a broken thread. This was torn here, he said. Someone tried to free it, or it caught on the spike. Jacob watched from a shadow and then came forward when the watchman called his name. Jacob, did you see anyone by the gate? The watchman asked. Jacob's eyes slid away. He gestured to his sleeve where tiny ragged wool hung loose. I walked by after the lantern fell, he said. I pulled at a thread on the fence to free a bird trap. I did not take charms, his voice wavered. The watchman exchanged a look with Thomas. They found a small suit, black and charm, snagged on the ironwork. It was one Marga recognized by pattern. She stepped forward and took it from the watchman's hand. The metal was cold and smeared with ash. She pressed it to her lips as if to test its shape and then said nothing. The midwife arrived, breath quick from stairs. She saw the charm and the torn rosary and put a hand to her mouth. "I did not put it there," she said. "I kept them safe tonight." I swear it, her palms showed dirt from her work with bundles. Her voice held an edge. People pressed in with questions. "Thomas, who in the village walks about at dusk? Who is seen at the edge of the lane?" The elder answered, "We have many who keep ways during dusk. The sweeper, the shepherd, Jacob, when he tends the goat." But none would take a charm and a child. His fingers dug into the wood of his staff. Accusation built like a stone pile. Some named strangers. Others it must be someone known. A whisper passed that the person who took charms had been seen vanishing each dusk. Words moved from suspicion to the possibility of betrayal. Marga watched faces shiver with the idea of someone known taking the things meant to protect. Jacob stepped forward in the sudden silence. His voice was small. "I took nothing," he said. "I passed by to mend a net. I heard a small cry by the green and I followed. I saw a child and I brought it away from freezing ground. I only wanted to warm the child." His hands opened and closed. "I only took the charm because I thought it would bring warmth." The crowd reacted with quick breaths. Marga's fear twisted into anger. She moved to the green quickly. "Jacob," she said, "did you take the shoe? Did you cut the charm?" Jacob's face went pale in the lamplight. "I found a child shivering," he answered. "I wrapped it, and I brought it to the lane. I thought the charm would keep them safe. I thought the charms might be attracting worse things. I panicked. I am sorry." His words tumbled. He did not meet Marga's eyes. The night watchman reached for Jacob then, his hand fast on Jacob's sleeve. Others closed ranks around them. "Bring him here," the elder said. "Bring him to Elsbeth's door. She will say if he lies." Voices exchanged 3 to 6 quick lines. Elsbeth kept rubbing her palms. Thomas muttered about brazier coals. Marga lit her lamp steadier and watched Jacob's shoulders. They took Jacob to the midwife's doorway. He trembled and his breath smoked in the air. Elsbeth looked at the child Jacob brought. The child was small and shaking but alive. Marga stepped close and touched the child's cheek. It was cold and then a little warm under her hand. She felt relief and then new worry. "Where found?" she asked. "Jacob, by the hedge near the field lane. I could hear crying and I saw a shadow move. I thought someone had abandoned the child. I took it." He lowered his head. The elder's face reddened. "Why would you take charms?" the elder demanded. Jacob looked up then and said, "I feared the charms called something worse. I thought they might be bait. I am hungry and I am afraid. I took a charm to keep the child from hunger. I did not mean harm." The confession landed like a small blow. A hush fell. There was a small twist in everyone's understanding. Suspicion shifted toward comprehension and then to anger. People argued sharply. "Jacob, Thomas, you will answer for this. You stole from the children of the village. I only tried to save the child." "Jacob." The exchange moved 3, 4 lines back and forth until the elder lifted his hand to stop them. The night watchman searched Jacob's cloak and found a second charm stitched into a hidden seam. Jacob's face crumpled. He pressed both palms to his face and then put them down. Tears did not fall, but his shoulders hitched. "I thought if I took charms and children away from porches, I would keep them from being taken by worse things," he said. "I heard talk. I heard the story that charms could draw a thing that steals children. I was hungry. I was angry. I did not know how else to stop it." His voice broke into short sentences. Marga felt a new emotion form. Betrayal that yielded to a fragile pity. She had thought a stranger had come. Now she saw a boy she had known stumble under hunger and a rumor. Her hands moved to find the child's shoe again. She pressed the small heel into the child's palm. The child looked up and blinked with cold eyes. Marga breathed out and felt some heat return to her chest. The elder said, "Jacob, you must explain why you took charms from these doors." Jacob looked at the roofs and then said, "I watched the brazier being smothered. I saw the lantern split. I thought the lights were being put out on purpose. I thought someone walked the green, taking warmth and tokens. I feared they would take children in the dark. I wanted to keep them away from porches and bring them to safety. His sentences were short and uneven. An older woman in the crowd spoke then, and she surprised the assembly by naming the detail they had missed. "The lantern fell," she said. "Glass scattered. A child's shoe lay on the cobbles 2 nights ago. Her voice was steady and plain. We found it then. Someone might have followed the pattern. Whoever patches holes in nets and mends ropes knows which not to loosen." This reminded people of the earlier incident when the central lantern had gone out and a child's small shoe lay on the wet cobbles. They connected that event to these missing charms and the brazier tamped near the gate. The villagers shifted. Suspicion flared toward a new angle. Some suggested strangers, others looked at their own. A fisherman shouted from the sluice, "There is a child's shoe on the bank." The soft-spoken historian stepped forward before anyone else, suspicion tightening his voice as he called back, "Show me." Within moments the villagers crowded the grass, and a single wet footprint led away from the river toward the cottages. The shoe lay a handspan into the reeds. Beside it, a wooden charm bead sat split cleanly in 2. The problem was immediate and sharp. A child was missing, and the charm that had protected the child had been cut. The historian's suspicion drove him to move faster than his habit suggested. He remembered the lantern on the green that crashed 2 nights earlier and the phrase someone had cried then, "The lights down." He remembered the night watchman returning with a damp bundle dragged from the iron gate and the cut charm found later in a corner of the yard. Those incidents had been small, separate strikes. Now their edges fit together. He walked the riverbank and checked the footprint with his fingers, felt how the wet clay stuck where a small heel had pressed down. He felt doubt and then fear, emotion shifting from suspicion to fear as the pattern hardened. "Charm cut, shoe lost, child gone, Marga," the constable said, naming the widow who had raised the missing child's sister. "Did you see Thomas last night?" The village gathered into conversation immediately. Voices rose in short bursts. The historian listened and kept his hands free, holding his brass watch against his palm, as if the metal steadied his attention. Widow Marga pressed her fingers to the mouth of the small girl who had slept in her cottage. Her hands trembled as she spoke. "I woke and the cradle rope felt loose. I cried for Thomas." The charm was gone from the cradle rim. Her voice cut off when the healer's apprentice pointed at the cut bead. The historian watched Marga's jaw clamp, watched the old habit of counting blessings turn into something like accusation. A cluster of villagers pushed toward the gate. The night watchman, his coat still smelling of rain and iron, stood with his staff held low. He kept his eyes on the river. The constable said, "Night watchman, you were out by the sluice after midnight. Did you see anyone cloaked?" The man answered in short lines. "I saw a figure by the old bridge. Cloak, I think." It moved toward the marsh and then toward Thomas S. Lane. Thomas stepped forward, wiping oil from his hands onto his apron. "I fixed the lantern ropes at dusk, Thomas. I left the green lit. I slept by my bench and woke to glass. My ropes were tampered with, yes, but I did not take a child." His voice was thin. The villagers reacted fast. Some pressed their faces close, others crossed their arms. The historian felt another emotion shift. Doubt toward Thomas, neighbors edged toward anger, but then a new knot formed in his chest as he watched Thomas' hands shake while he spoke. The tremble told a different story than guilty calculation. They searched along the marsh. A child's wooden shoe stuck with reeds, half buried. The healer's apprentice knelt and brushed mud away. When she uncovered soot on the shoe's toe, she spoke out loud enough for all to hear. This was near the hearth. Soot like from a brazier, the historian noted how the soot contradicted Thomas' claim that he had been in his workshop by the fire all night. He also noted how the night watchman avoided Thomas' eyes and kept staring at the damp path back to the sluice. At the healer's shed, the healer turned the broken bead under a lamp and said, "This is not a ragged tear. It is a clean cut." Whoever did this knew the old unbinding practice. Widow Marga pressed her palm to the table and said, "Unbinding. Who would think to free a child from protection?" The healer tapped the bead with a small bone tool and explained in concrete terms. The bead had been shaved and split with the same edge, used to sever cords of warding. The historian felt the emotion in the room pivot again, fear bending to confusion, then to a different fear. Someone had believed removal would help. The constable found a length of rope in Thomas' workshop that matched the ropes used on the village lanterns. Its fibers had been abraded near one end. Thomas narrowed his eyes. "I repair ropes daily," he said. "I have spliced many a line. But that fray is not mine. Ask me what I had for supper if you must. Ask me where I slept." He pushed a small stool back with his foot, as if to put distance between his hands and the accusation. The villagers demanded quick answers. 3 voices asked at once. The historian noticed the pattern of rapid exchanges and how names traveled between mouths to keep track of blame. The constable argued with Thomas in a short, clipped sequence. "Thomas, the rope fibers match the green. I told you, I work with rope. Who saw you at the green after dusk?" "No one. I was at my bench." "Then how did your rope get to the green?" "I do not know. You must have been there." "No." The voices rose and fell in short lines, a rapid back and forth of conviction and denial. The historian recorded their words and watched Thomas' mouth as he forced each reply. Thomas' responses were short and tidy, but his shoulders began to tremble. They followed tracks toward the old watchtower in the center of the village. At dusk, the lantern at the green had fallen and shattered. Glass glittered like a warning. The historian remembered that sound clearly, the way neighbors had called out then. Those earlier moments had been unconnected in the village mind. Now each memory became a mark on a map. The search party moved in pairs, hands on staffs, calling names. The night watchman walked a half step behind the healer and ahead of Thomas. He kept his head low. Late morning, the search party found a fragment of the charm caught in a reed, blackened with soot. "Look here," the healer said, holding it with a cloth. His description was plain. Someone tried to burn this after cutting it. The soot pattern shows heat from ember, not open flame. That detail shifted the hypothesis. The remover cut the bead and attempted to destroy evidence quickly, but the burning was imperfect. The historian felt suspicion curl into certainty about intent. Yet the night watchman's face registered something else, an odd relief mixed with grief, an emotion the historian read as fear turned to resolve. They returned to the green at dusk. The constable ordered Thomas' workshop door opened. Neighbors crowded the threshold and found tampered lantern ropes laid over the bench. "These match the ones tied to the green lantern," the constable said. Thomas stepped between the ropes and his workbench, and the village split into 2 camps. Those wanting immediate punishment and those hesitating, asking for motive rather than revenge. The historian listened as voices tossed the word mercy and the word justice back and forth. Thomas's jaw worked. If I were guilty of more than my trade, I would tell you." His hands drifted toward his apron, as if to touch the tools that anchored him. Night fell. The search went on with lanterns and hand-held braziers. At midnight, the watchtower held a single figure, and the rattle of wind. The night watchman stood on the tower platform, the child wrapped in a blanket across his arm, the severed charm tucked into the folds of his coat. His face was pale under lamplight. When the constable called up, the man answered with a voice that shook. "Why are you here, night watchman?" Widow Marga demanded, her voice cutting across the platform. The historian watched how the man dropped his gaze to the child and held the bead so everyone could see the split. "I found the child in the reeds. Marga," he said, "I found her near the sluice. She was panting and her ankle caught. I cut the charm to free her from a ward I believed would bind her to harm." His hands tightened on the blanket. The historian noted the word believed, like a hinge that opened into motive. There was a pause. The constable stepped forward and asked, "You cut a charm that was meant to protect." The night watchman met that question with a short sentence. "I thought I was saving her." His voice had no plea, only the mechanical certainty of someone who had made a hard, immediate choice. The scene exploded into quick lines of argument. "You had no right." Thomas shouted, "You stole from a cradle." "I did not take her," the night watchman replied. "I carried her from the reeds to the tower where she could be warm." "Why not bring her to the healer?" She coughed. "I feared the ward would bind her breath to fever." "Your fear does not give you cutting tools." "My fear kept her breathing." The historian heard voices crisscross like ropes. Anger and defense collided. Names landed in every sentence so listeners could track who spoke. The healer crossed his arms and examined the child. He pressed a small palm to the girl's chest and checked for fever. The child sucked weakly on fingers and opened one eye. The healer said, "She is soothed, marked in cold. Her thigh has a bruise from reeds. She is alive because someone carried her out." "Who carried her?" Several people answered at once. The night watchman held up his hand. "I carried her." He added a detail that changed several faces. "I cut the charm because I had listened to old tales. I thought the ward would bind misfortune to her, not keep it away. I judged wrong." The historian felt another emotion shift in the room. Fury sliding toward pity for the man whose fear had moved him to action. Widow Marga stepped closer. She reached for the child's hand and then stopped, whispering the name the child had spoken in sleep. "Edda," she said. The name itself tightened the room. Marga's hands did not shake when she spoke the name. They steadied in the ritual of touch. She looked at the night watchman without flinching and asked 3 short questions in succession. "Why did you not call me?" "I thought you would find her better at the tower." "Why did you cut the charm instead of bringing it to the healer?" "I thought the ward would pull worseness to her, not keep it from her." "Who taught you that?" My grandmother's songs." "She wards can tie breath to fate." Marga's voice contained a contained fury that came from betrayal more than surprise. The historian observed how Marga searched the man's face for the memory that had decided the child's fate. The constable then produced a small spool of rope and the charred fragment. He held them between 2 fingers and said plainly, "We have rope fibers from the green and a bead that shows a cutting tool mark. We also have testimony that someone saw a cloaked figure by the bridge." "Which of you saw a cloaked figure by the bridge?" The night watchman swallowed. Thomas replied, "I did not see a cloaked figure. I saw movement near the marsh, but I am handy with rope and I do not sleep beyond my bench." Several neighbors chimed in, each voice short, each line naming another small sighting. A shadow, a rustle, a distant footfall. The historian counted these external events like ledger entries. Every few minutes something concrete occurred to shift the conversation. The healer spoke, offering a new detail that turned suspicion slightly again. "The cut on this bead matches an unbinding knife, but the tool marks come from someone who used the edge quickly, not carefully. That suggests haste and urgency." He paused and added, "The soot on the fragment shows ember, like someone rinsed ash into water to cool a fire that had been used to sear the bead's edge." The historian watched Thomas' shoulders slump as neighbors muttered, "Thomas, I mend ropes when they fray. I have no reason to free a child of her ward." His last sentence was quiet but sharp. The constable frowned and turned to the night watchman. At the watchtower, the historian agreed to stay and tell the assembled what he had observed earlier. The slippered footprints, the charred fragment, the pattern of tampered ropes. He also repeated the small memory from 2 nights before. The lantern that had fallen and the cry, the lights down. He let that concrete memory stand without commentary, only placing it next to the new evidence. That repetition connected the events, and the villagers shifted in their perception. The historian let silence hold for 2 breaths, then asked a measured question. Who among you would believe the ward to be a trap? Who among you would cut to free, even without a healess word? The healess apprentice spoke then, her voice low and precise. Old songs say some wards bind breath to a fate. People stitch them on in fear. Some believe cutting can stop what they fear. Her sentence created a small fissure in how the villagers understood motive. The historian heard an emotion shift in the crowd, from accusation to something like reluctant understanding. Not forgiveness, but an ability to name what had driven a human hand. Then the twist. The constable unrolled a scrap of cloth found tucked beneath a floorboard in the watch tower. It had a smear of soot and a child's initial carved in a shaky hand. Marga recognized the carving instantly. Her throat tightened. "This is mine," she said. "Edda had a scrap like that." It was in her cradle. The historian watched how that single object refocused anger, and then cleared it. The child had been to the watch tower, and the night watchman's action had not been an abduction, but an attempted rescue. Arguments flared again, shorter and sharper. "You should have told us, man! Thomas, you brought shame where there was only care. You left her uncontrolled by her mother!" Another cried. The night watchman answered with 2 short lines. "I did what terrified me. I acted alone because I feared the ward. I did not steal her for harm." His voice contained both defense and exhaustion. The healer nodded slowly and said, "He saved a life. He also made a choice without counsel. We must decide what to do with both facts." That sentence split the options. Punishment for unilateral action, or mercy because a life was saved. The villagers argued and then did what villagers do when pivoting between judgment and mercy. They set small tasks. Some set to mend the broken lantern ropes at the green, others stoked braziers to dry blankets, and a few followed the healer to check the child's condition. Action distributed the emotion, turning a single flash of outrage into work. The historian walked between tasks, recording names and actions. Thomas set to reweaving the frayed rope with hands that moved technically, each not a small argument against an accusation. Marga sat by the child's cot and hummed the same lullaby she had sung when the cradle had hung whole. The constable convened a short council at dawn. He listed facts with clipped sentences: the child found, the bead cut, the night watchman carried her, the damage to ropes from Thomas' tools. Then he paused and asked the village to vote on a response. Voices raised and hands went up in a quick, civic chorus. Some wanted immediate removal of the watchman's post. Others insisted on mercy. Thomas moved to kneel and work on the green's ropes. His fingers steadying, he let the ropes be mended. Let evidence speak for itself. His motion was practical, designed to anchor judgment in physical repair rather than rhetoric. The healer recommended a middle path, a period of penance for the night watchman in service of village watch, and public apology at the green. The constable agreed to hold back harsher punishment. He looked at the night watchman and said, "You will keep watch, but your tools will be inspected each dusk. You will report any fear you heard that drove you to act." The night watchman nodded, his relief visible in a slackening of shoulders and a broken, wet smile. Marga bent and adjusted the blanket around the child. "We will mend the charm together, openly, and hang it on the green so all see it." The historian noted that act as physical restitution, making an object visible to replace secretive action. At first light, the villagers rehung lanterns and retied the charm to the green's post. The historian watched Thomas pass a new knot around the lamphook while neighbors held steady the ladder. The child slept between Marga and the healer on a cot under a thin blanket. The night watchman stood a little apart, fingers folded, watching the hand that placed the bead. He nothing at first. He only breathed in and out with the labor of a man relieved from immediate panic. The community worked through small gestures. Ropes spliced, braziers banked, a promise to check on old songs and their meanings. The historian filed the incident in his notebook with precise lines. Footprint, charred bead, tampered rope, watchman's confession, healers reading. He did not write feelings in abstract. He wrote actions and choices. He wrote that fear had led the night watchman to cut, that the cut had been done hurriedly with the intent to free, and that the village had chosen to mend rather than break. He closed the notebook and put it into the pocket of his coat. His movements were careful and exact, as if finishing a ritual of record. A week later, the night watchman returned to the tower each dusk, not because his duty required it alone, but because the village had agreed he would stand in view and be seen doing his work. Thomas continued to mend ropes and offered his bench to any young man who wanted to learn the craft of splicing. Widow Marga kept the child a small scrap of cloth pinned inside her scarf and would show it to anyone who asked. The healer taught a brief lesson in the square about wards and signs so that neighbors would not act on fear alone. The final action in the chapter happened where the chapter had begun, at the river sluice. The historian walked there at dawn with Marga and the night watchman. They stood over the reed where the shoe had been found. Marga lifted the shoe and set it on the green sedge. She pressed both palms to the wooden bead, now remade and strung openly onto a length of cord. The night watchman knelt and threaded the cord through the bead while Thomas tightened a new knot above it. The historian watched their hands work in sequence. Marga placing, night watchman threading, Thomas securing. Each motion spoke without a speech the repair of trust. The chapter closed on a concrete beat. Thomas tied the final knot to the lamphook on the green. Marga let the child scrap flutter once in the cool air, and the night watchman stepped back from the post and then turned to set the watch's brazier alight. The brazier glowed, ember to ember, and a neighbor lit the lantern overhead. The lights shone steadily now, ropes intact, a charm hung openly where everyone could see it. The historian recorded the sequence of actions and left the village with the image of hands that had made a decision together rather than alone. He carried that list of actions as proof that fear, ritual, and tenderness could collide and be remade into careful, visible work. In the last line of the chapter, a lantern was raised on its hook, and the village breathed as the green filled with a steady, human light.